In the search for our next extremely difficult MyGM challenge, we found ourselves wondering one thing. Would it be possible to win on the hardest difficulty with shakeups turned off and minimum budget while saying no to every single request from your roster? On top of that, I have to fail the commissioner goal for every single week, and this is going to pose multiple problems for us. Firstly, managing the morale of your superstars is one of the most important things to do in MyGM, as if they become unhappy, they'll demand $100,000 to stay, or they'll tear up their contract and leave. Of course, in this challenge, if that does happen, I'll simply have to say no and watch them go, which won't hurt me financially, but it will ruin any booking plans I have for them at the time. Secondly, the commissioner goals give you a free power card every week you fulfill them, meaning we'll be missing out on 25 free cards that could potentially make or break the run for us. So with all of that in mind, welcome to the Vince McMahon MyGM challenge. When choosing who my GM was going to be, there was really only one option. It had to be Stephanie.
Definitely.
No, Stephanie.
Not because she was going to help us in any way, but because I thought it would add a layer of comedy to see her following in her dad's footsteps. For the brand, I went with NXT 2.0, as I knew I'd be losing a few of my stars along the way due to morale. So the Fresh Meat Power Card would allow us to buy 3 free agents for half the price if my roster started to get too thin. Then for the opponents, I decided on Eric Bischoff, Xavier Woods, and of course, the man that makes every MyGM run as difficult as possible, Mick Foley. I also gave Foley NXT as his brand, knowing that this is the best one to choose, just to add another layer of difficulty, so we'll have to see how that one pans out throughout the weeks. Seeing as I didn't have any restrictions here, I simply tried to draft the best roster I could in terms of stamina, star power, and class type matchups. In the end, I went for Commander Aziz, as Vince absolutely loves a giant, Jimmy Uso, Solo Sikoa, Damian Priest, Ivar, another giant, and Angel in the men's division. And then Rhea Ripley, Alba Fire, Raquel, Tamina, Zelina, and Liv Morgan in the women's division. From there, I decided to give the men's title to Jimmy Uso, so he'd be fighting Commander Aziz for it. And the women's title, of course, to Rhea Ripley. Seeing as we don't have anyone to annoy in our inbox, all we need to do this week is make sure our son-in-law is miserable and get on with booking the show. Thankfully, Triple H only asked us to schedule a run-in on our most popular star this week, which is an easy one to avoid doing, so this week was very straightforward. We got a good booking rating for a week where we crowned 2 new champions in order to gain some popularity on our stars, but we actually only gained the 3rd most fans this week, with both SmackDown and Raw beating us by a fair bit. Thankfully, I was still ahead of Mick Foley though, which is all I really cared about. Immediately in week 2, we encountered our first issue. Understandably, Jimmy Uso wanted a rematch for his NXT title, but Vince had other plans for the Cruiser.
No chance.
Lowering the challenger for our main men's titles morale this early on was not a good start. Chances are he'd come back with another request soon, and it would all go downhill from there, so we'd need to be careful. Not only did I now have an unhappy superstar on my roster, I also realised that I needed to sign a few more people to challenge for the North American Championship, and then also for a filler rivalry to help out with stamina. So I used my Fresh Meat card and went shopping. The thought process behind using this now was that I could save some money on 3 stars as long as I signed permanent ones from the free agent pool, instead of signing them in my draft for full price. So after using the card, I decided to sign Drew McIntyre and Logan Paul to feud for the North American title, and then Tommaso Ciampa to feud with another new person as my last discounted pick. Seeing as Ciampa was simply there to help out with stamina for the first 5 weeks, I decided to sign a jobber as the last addition, to save myself a bit more money as the ratings of their matches didn't really matter too much. This meant that in week 2, we had the North American Championship on the line in the second midcard match, and then the 2 tag team matches are the opener and main event. Triple H wanted us to have at least one TLC match this week, which again was an easy one to avoid, as having such a stamina heavy match this early on was never in my plans anyway. The show itself was okay at best. We did get another good booking rating, but the matchups weren't exactly blockbusters. We picked up 39,000 fans this week, and we're actually the lowest gaining brand out of the 4. It wasn't a good start, and to make things worse, Mick Foley had overtaken us in the leaderboards. On to week 3 now, and the emails came flooding in. Well, all 2 of them anyway. But we had to sacrifice the morale of 2 more stars yet again. If this many people are going to be let down every single week, I imagine it won't be long until they all just tear up their contracts and leave. This challenge could get very ugly very quickly. To add more misery to this abysmal start, Triple H wanted us to not book our most popular cruiser this week, which I assumed would be Jimmy Uso, but thankfully it was actually Angel as he had one half of the tag belts. It was the male tag team's week off anyway, so this didn't end up affecting us at all. But I can tell that these restrictions are going to hurt us at some point down the line. With 2 more miserable wrestlers on our roster, we put together a killer card for week 3, knowing that we had to step it up in order to get ourselves back on track in this challenge. We had 4 titles on the line as Jimmy Uso would get a chance to redeem his gold in the main event. Now, I know what some of you are thinking, Jimmy Uso asked for a title match within 2 weeks, and here he is getting what he asked for. But the damage was already done to his morale as soon as I said no, so giving him this match wasn't going to fix that. If anything, he'd just be more confused, I guess. Not only did this show smash it out of the park in terms of ratings, we also gained 60,000 new fans this week, which was helped by 2 charity promos that I'd snuck in. Sadly though, SmackDown gained a very respectable 54,000 fans and stayed firmly in the lead going into week 4. However, with that excellent show, we managed to jump all the way up to 2nd place, so things were looking up. That is, until... yep, you guessed it. Poor old Mick Foley's fragile little ego couldn't handle being last in the leaderboards, so instead of going for the number 1 spot, which any logical human who hadn't been smashed over the head with multiple chair shots would do, he goes for us. I keep having to remind myself that this is just a game, as I really liked Foley before 2K23 dropped, and now I can't even bear to look at his face. As if that wasn't enough, heading into week 4 we had Ivar innocently asking for a tag team match with Drew McIntyre. Unfortunately, after what Mick just did, I was in no mood to entertain his strange booking suggestions and quickly showed him the way out of my office. So now his morale was down too. Great. At least Triple H was being nice to us this week. He saw that we'd rested our female tag champs the week before, so very kindly asked us to do it again this week, which of course we weren't going to do. Despite his kindness though, this show was going to be a train wreck as we had 2 guaranteed injuries coming up. I decided to drop in Lurch Evans vs Ciampa in the hope that it'd be one of them that got injured, but the rest of the card was pretty star-studded. As we simulated through the matches, I was dreading the worst. An injury to either of our singles champions would be disastrous this close to a PLE. All I could do was hope that this show was a success and minimal damage was done. What ended up happening was not actually a bad scenario, as in the women's tag match, 2 competitors suffered the injuries, meaning that we were only missing out on one of the rivalries going into the PLE. Sadly, Tamina and Liv Morgan were going to be out, but I was confident we could still put on a pretty good show without them. What would be more annoying is the consecutive weeks we'd have without a women's tag match after this show. But that was future me's problem. As far as I was concerned, I had to take the lead after week 5. We got another good booking and gained 65,000 fans, so things were really picking up. We were still behind Bischoff, but only by 2,000 fans, so I wasn't too worried. The main thing was that Mick Foley was drifting further and further away from the rest of the pack, and that made me a little bit happy. And just like that, it was Backlash time. Things didn't start well though, as I had to reject Raquel's request for a title match, but that wouldn't have been possible to do anyway with our injuries, so I didn't feel too bad. The commissioner goal was to have at least 1 steel cage match this week, so not too difficult to fail again. And the show was actually shaping up to be a good one. Annoyingly, I had to throw in Ciampa vs Lurch Evans due to the missing women's tag match, but the rest of the card looked great. And as expected, it performed great as well, with us getting a 4.5 star, a 2 star, 4 star, 3.5 star, and then 4.5 star rating for the matches, and achieving our first amazing booking. On top of that, we managed to smash the competition in terms of fans gained, as we got the most by around 33,000. This put us comfortably in the lead, but I couldn't get ahead of myself. I still had the injuries to worry about, which could mess up my bookings for another 3 weeks, then also the superstars' morale who I'd let down. Eventually, they were going to come back and cause me issues, and that could potentially mess up the entire run. Still, it was a great first PLE, and I felt somewhat confident going into week 6. Unfortunately, this week was a bit of a wake-up call for me. Not only was I starting to struggle with stamina already, I also had Raquel demanding $100,000 to stay. I only rejected one of her requests, so this seems like a bit of an overreaction, but I knew it would happen eventually. Of course, I said no to the bonus, and she was gone. I just had to bite the bullet and plan the next show as best as I could, and that meant signing a new addition to my roster. Seeing as I couldn't put on a women's tag match and Raquel had abruptly left the company, I needed an opponent for Zelina so I could save some stamina on my other stars. I signed Indy Hartwell and threw them straight into a match, alongside 3 other rivalries that never finished at Backlash. In fact, the men's tag match was only a level 1, which was weirdly helpful actually. Also, Trips wanted us to rest our male tag champs this week, so of course, they were in the main event. It's a good job those rivalries did carry over as well, as our opener and main event carried us to a good show, with them gaining a 4.5 star and a 3.5 star rating respectively. We gained 66,000 fans, which was the most again by a fair amount. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, as Logan Paul picked up an injury in his match with Drew, meaning that we'd have even less options for next week's card, and stamina was already an issue. Even though we were flying in terms of fans gained and where we were in the rankings, things were actually falling apart behind the scenes. Alba Fyre was the next person to ask for a huge bonus, and she was one of our most popular stars. Losing her would be catastrophic in the build up to the Week 10 PLE, as there was barely any time left to forge another rivalry, but thankfully she gave us another chance. That stroke of luck might have just prevented us from free falling into disaster. Even with that slightly positive outcome though, I still had to lower Ciampa's morale. The warning signs were there, and there was nothing I could really do about it. I only had to not book my least popular star this week, which wasn't too challenging. However, the show I put on was extremely low budget. I still had the male tag rivalry and Jimmy vs Ivar brewing, so I put them either side of the same stamina saving matches as before. I also signed Aaliyah to throw into another rivalry, but needed to change her role first, so this show just stank. Or at least that's what I thought. Somehow the opening match got a 4-star rating, and so did the main event, with Ciampa vs Lurch Evans actually putting on a 3-star match. This resulted in an amazing booking rating and 66,000 fans gained, keeping us rooted firmly to the top of the leaderboard. But surely this would change soon. There's no way this small of a roster can continue to dominate, right? Well, in week 8 we had another potential casualty. Liv Morgan, who was just returning from injury, threatened to leave, and of course I rejected the bonus that she was demanding. But unfortunately, we didn't get lucky this time, and just like that, she was gone as well. This week was a tough one. I had to rest my least popular specialist, which was Lurch Evans, and he was one of the few that could actually fight in order to save stamina. The thing that really helped us here was the extra money we'd saved throughout the run, as it allowed us to sign some more people to our roster and put on a show that actually looked pretty solid. I also decided to use the McMahon Presence Power card in order to double the money earned from the arena attendance this week. There wasn't really an obvious time to use this, so I thought it'd be best to use it in a week where I made a couple of signings. Katana Chance and Beth Spartan joined NXT 2.0 and were thrown immediately into a match for the titles. Fortunately, Tamina had returned from her injury, so this was possible, but this rivalry won't be anything special seeing as the PLE was right around the corner. Their match ended up getting a 2-star in what was a weird week for us. We had a great opener, but the new rivalry of Rhea vs Aaliyah didn't do as well as the second midcard match. I don't know why every match had to have rhyming names, by the way. Rhea vs Aaliyah, Tamina and Zelina, that was just a weird coincidence, not something Vince would do. The poor finale rating was a bit of a blow, and realistically was all my fault. The tag match had a good rivalry going into it and was always going to outperform the new one, but we had to just deal with it. Despite all of that, somehow yet again we managed to gain the most fans and extend our lead. I'm starting to think a challenge where I just can't use charity promos might be impossible now. Even though we were flying in terms of ratings, the problems just kept mounting up. In week 9, Tamina came to me and demanded a bonus or she'd leave. Thankfully, much like Alba Fyre did, she stayed and gave us one more chance when we rejected it. The issue I'm seeing here is that eventually people will be leaving almost every week, and rivalries will be incredibly hard to manage. Alongside Tamina's request, Indy Hartwell also asked to be in a match with Katana Chance, to which I obviously said no, so I can expect her to come back crying for money very soon. Triple H wanted us to have one Extreme Rules match this week, so we managed that with no trouble at all. And as we were able to hold on to Tamina, week 9's show actually looked pretty good. But the results would suggest otherwise. Ciampa and Lurch Evans once again put on a surprisingly good match and completely blew the opener out of the water, throwing off the entire drama curve. We saw a significant drop off in fans gained this week as we actually came second to SmackDown, our closest competitor. It didn't make much difference in the standings, but we needed to make sure that we didn't start rapidly declining. The Week 10 PLE was an important one in keeping this challenge on track. And just as we needed a big show more than ever, disaster struck. Logan Paul threw his toys out the pram and decided to leave the company. Unfortunately for us, he was currently in a level 3 rivalry with Drew for the North American Championship, so those plans were completely ruined for Hell in a Cell. How are we going to cope without one of our main matches? I didn't even have time to consider that as Ciampa flew in and made a request which was shut down immediately. So it looks like he'll be gone in the near future as well then. Great. Luckily though, our string of easy to deal with commissioner goals continued as Triple H asked us to have a backstage brawl on the show, which was very easy to avoid. I planned out a card that included some big matchups, hoping that this would be a nice balance of variety and exciting stipulations whilst not damaging our stamina too much. We finally saw the completion of our male tag team rivalry as they picked up a 4.5 star classic rating, with Priest and Commander Aziz retaining once again. The mid-cards were then all pretty good results, with Ciampa and Lurch getting a 3.5 star, Rhea and Aaliyah getting a 4.5 star classic, and the women's tag match getting a 3 star. Finally, the main event was the men's title match between Jimmy Uso and Ivar, which also got a 4.5 star classic rating and ended a pretty solid PLE for us. But would the results reflect that? Well, we got an amazing booking and comfortably outgained the other brands in terms of fans. So things seem to be going smoothly again. Of course, we had a couple of emails in our inbox though that resulted in us losing morale on Commander Aziz and Beth Spartan, but that was just a weekly occurrence at this point. The next 5 weeks were all fairly similar. The commissioner goals were all pretty simple to manage, and we developed some new rivalries amongst our roster ready for the PLE. Unfortunately, as expected, we did lose Tamina along the way, who tore up her contract as we rejected her request for a bonus, but that wasn't going to stop us. Heading into Survivor Series, we had a 121,000 fan lead and a Hall of Fame trophy as well, which no one else had managed to achieve yet, so this was the chance to put ourselves even further ahead before we got into the last 10 weeks. The card wasn't spectacular by any means, with barely any variety on display, but we got some good results nonetheless and managed to secure an amazing booking rating. Our lead was only increasing week on week, and I started to think that this was less of a challenge and more of a fun video concept. It didn't seem to matter how many stars we lost, as we had enough cash to replace them, and the shows didn't seem to be suffering too much because of it either. On top of that, Triple H was sucking up to his father-in-law and making sure we had an easy time with the commissioner goals. It all seemed a bit too easy. That is until we got to week 18, when I realised that I'd made a huge mistake by just coasting through the run. Week 16 and 17 went the same as the other weeks before it and saw us extend our lead in terms of fans, but I didn't realise that Eric Bischoff had managed to secure another Hall of Fame trophy, which was huge. I booked week 18's show and made sure to fail the commissioner goal as always, and even though the show was okay and I gained the most fans out of all the brands, I was now in second place. That extra Hall of Fame trophy was bridging the gap of 169,000 fans between me and Bischoff, which, I'm not gonna lie, made me panic, as we really didn't have much time left to get another one. To add to this newly found worry, Drew McIntyre decided that he'd had enough and walked. It all seemed to be falling apart at the last hurdle, and there might not be anything I could even do about it. As week 19 rolled around, I immediately checked the trophies and what I'd need to do in order to get my hands on another one. Thankfully, I'd completed 3 of them by just playing the game, but I still needed another 2, and it seemed like I was in luck. 2 of the challenges were both based around having an interference in the show, with one of them specifically being a GM interference. I'd managed to put in 2 interferences already, so that left me with 6 more to do, and 5 of them had to be GM ones. If I did this in every single week, I'd gain the Hall of Fame trophy 1 week before WrestleMania, and that would be just in time as the leaderboards take a week to update when the trophies have been gained. Triple H then nearly gave me a heart attack as he told us to not schedule a run-in this week, but thankfully a walk-in from Stephanie was just fine. The show itself had a lot of new faces that I'd picked up during the last 8 weeks, and honestly didn't give us great results at all. The only thing I was focused on now though was achieving that trophy, as we realistically had enough fans to carry us over the finish line anyway. Having to include a GM interference every single week may not actually be possible. If one of Triple H's commissioner goals was to schedule one of these at any point between now and WrestleMania, then it's done. I can't include it and I'd lose the run. Thankfully for the week 20 PLE, it was an easy goal to fail, and the show went almost perfectly. We started off with a 5-star match between Aaliyah and Indy Hartwell that saw Aaliyah retain her title that she took off Rhea Ripley. Then the 3 mid-card matches were all decent, but not great results, which was fine. It all ended with Vince McMahon's dreams coming true once again as Braun Strowman defeated Jimmy Uso to become the new NXT champion in another 5-star legendary match. If I could keep this up, then in theory we'd have no issues, but I couldn't help but worry seeing as every week I saw myself second in those leaderboards. On to the last 5 weeks now, and things were honestly all over the place. I didn't really have solid plans for rivalries, and stamina was at an all-time low. Triple H did try to help us out by requesting a Hell in a Cell match this week, which made our life a bit easier. We demoted the initial men's title rivalry between Ivar and Jimmy Uso down to the North American Championship and reignited it there. Then we got a rivalry going between Bobby Roode and Braun Strowman for the main title. We gained roughly the same amount of fans as SmackDown this week, meaning that we were still miles ahead on that front. But no matter how big that gap was, that one trophy made all the difference. To kick off week 22, we had 3 stars come to me to renew their contracts, including our men's champion Braun Strowman and both of our female tag champions, Queen Bee and Dakota Kai. But I had to reject them all. This is something that I dealt with earlier in the run, but managed to get through by just replacing them with someone new. But these 3 losses were going to hurt a lot more. Having to start 2 new rivalries for important belts was going to derail our WrestleMania show, as we barely had any time to make it all work. We had to just try our best to get by and make sure we got our hands on that second trophy in the process. Week 22 show went as well as it could have done, and we increased our lead in terms of fans yet again. But that final PLE was looming, and I needed it to be at least a passable show, or we could be in trouble here. Week 23 went by fairly smoothly, with a new rivalry being started between Bobby Roode and Tyler Bate to crown our next NXT champion. Unfortunately, Bobby Roode went over, but the show was at least okay, and we were now 266,000 fans ahead, but still in second place. Thankfully, next week would be the show where we complete the final challenge for another Hall of Fame trophy, so hopefully everything would align again after WrestleMania. Week 24 went much the same as last week, but this time my boy Tyler Bate got the win in a 5-star TLC match for the title. I used the power card to make sure that this show ended with a banger, and it seemed to have paid off as we gained the most fans again, and most importantly, got that second trophy. Sadly, the leaderboard didn't update this week, which meant we had to wait until after WrestleMania to make sure we'd actually won the challenge. And even though I knew that that should happen, I was still nervous. I planned out the final show and made sure to annoy Triple H just one more time. Despite being 99% certain that I was going to win, I still wanted to put on the best show possible to truly crush SmackDown in the final rankings. We started with the men's tag team match in a Hell in a Cell, which got us a solid 4.5-star rating. Then we followed it up with 3 more title matches in the mid-card, all with big stipulations as well. These matched the drama curve perfectly, as we got a 4-star, then a 4.5-star, then a 4-star in the results. The run may have been all but complete, but I still wanted to end things off with a bang. Tyler Bate retained, so I was happy with that, but sadly it only got a 4-star rating. This actually didn't end up impacting the drama curve though, as we still got an amazing booking score and went on to gain the most fans out of all the brands in the final week. This of course meant that we finished the season at the number 1 spot in the leaderboard, but those last 7 weeks really worried me. I got very lucky that I had just the right amount of time left to complete those trophy challenges, or I'd simply have lost this run. While this challenge was by no means the hardest one we've done, it was still a load of fun to do and provided some twists and turns along the way. If you want exclusive and early access to our content and loads of other benefits whilst also helping us continue to create this content for you, become a channel member now by using the link in the comments below.